Thought Criminals. I'm your host, Rachel Alexander. I'm the editor of Intellectual Conservative, a weekly contributor to Townhall. This is my mall, Ralph Benko. He's a weekly contributor to Newsmax, and he runs the, what is it, the Capitalist League on Facebook.
Yeah,
And we're named after the woke concepts in 1984, George Orwell's 1984. And so today, and you can find our articles and subscribe to us at thoughtcriminals.ning.com. Today, we're going to focus on how the Democrats keep saying that minorities are victims. And I just want to push back and say minorities are sick and tired of being called victims. And I also want to compare it and contrast it to women, because the one thing that's really bothered me about this is the Democrats always say, oh, well, blacks because of slavery, we need to, treat them differently nowadays because of that history. But you'll never hear them saying the same thing or similar about women. There was a time when most of us women could not vote. We could not own property. We were treated like property. And then all the societal norms where we weren't allowed to go outside and have jobs and leadership positions. And nobody ever seems to care about that. But in contrast, we now have this new phenomenon of calling women Karens. And I look at it and compare it to when, people rude in history, after the civil rights movement, would refer to blacks as uppity. What is the, and now you do not refer to black people that way. That is very offensive. So, why are black people no longer allowed to be referred to as uppity, but it's okay? It's okay. And in fact, people laugh about referring to women as Karens. What do you say, Ralph?
Well, I believe that both the Republicans and the Democrats are out of touch and are having both creating political and ethical problems for themselves and for America by getting by framing this completely wrong. So, for instance, I believe that the Democratic, oh, poor you, here, let us vote you some, let's throw you a few cheap subsidies to keep you quiet and keep you voting our way, is just absolutely wrong. It's patronizing and it's demeaning, and it implies an attitude that on the part of the left, not all Democrats, but on the part of the progressives who are driving the Democratic agenda and dragging their pragmatists and their centrists like Joe Biden along, kind of kicking and screaming. I think that it's morally wrong to demean people of color, and it's morally wrong to demean women and to marginalize them and to act as if they are incompetent and need to be subsidized because of to make reparations for the damage that has been done them. I believe that that there is systemic racism and there is systemic sexism, and I believe that it is the responsibility of all good conservatives to call it out, fight it, and extirpate it. Okay, but that means to make sure that people are based, as Dr. King said, people are evaluated based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin or their gender. So I as critical as I am about the Democrats patronizing and essentially coming up with programs that they believe will be buying rapport and buying votes, I'm even more ferociously upset with the Republican Party, to which I have the misfortune of belonging, by virtue of their callousness, too many of their unwillingness to see the systemic injustices that too many people have been handicapped by, and their unwillingness to fight for for liberty and justice for all. We've all taken the Pledge of Allegiance. We've taken it so many times that I think a lot of us have forgotten what's in there. It's become a rote saying: one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're all pledged to both liberty and justice. I see the Republicans paying lip service to liberty, particularly the liberty of big corporations not to pay taxes and not to be regulated, right? And completely dropping the ball on justice, which Barry Goldwater, in his famous presidential nomination speech, is everybody remembers his first line: extremism in defense of liberty is no virtue.
Vice.
Is no vice. That's right. Is no vice. But the couplet that went with this is, and moderation in a pursuit of justice is no virtue. So true conservatives are passionate about both liberty and justice. And I see the Democrats paying lip service to justice and defaulting on liberty, and the Republicans paying lip service to liberty and defaulting on justice. And I say it's time for conservatives. You set a great example on this, Rachel. You're a fine example of someone who is a passionate advocate both for real justice and real liberty. So I admire you for speaking truth to power and pushing back on the Democrats for patronizing people who've been people who's have been prejudiced and sucking up to people who've been privileged in terms of women and people of color. So yes, hold the Democrats accountable, but I'm also inviting you to join me in holding the Republicans accountable for their sins in this area.
Okay, now you brought up a phrase that is extremely loaded, systemic racism. And I don't like using that phrase because it's become so politically loaded and people have already formed their opinions about what they think it means. Now, if I were to agree that there is systemic racism, I want to explain what I believe it would entail. Because after dating a Black man for over 5 years now, this is the type of thing that I see, okay? He could be biking down the canal here in Phoenix, and the police might be out and about and see him, and they're going to stop him because he fits the description of a suspect in the area. Now, me, as a white woman, biking down the canal, there's a very little chance that the police are going to stop me and search me because I look like a suspect. So I agree. Yeah.
It's not that you look like a suspect, please. Okay, this is a well-known trope in the Black community. It's called driving while black. Blacks get pulled over for minor infractions like taillights out and speeding and running stop signs. Okay, in the burbs, approximately 10 times more often in proportion to their population as white people do. And they know about this. And this is an actual thing. And but it's worse.
But I am trying to explain why. It's not because police officers don't like Black people. It's because police officers think they fit the description of a suspect.
There's no justification for it, period. It's racial profiling. And if they can't tell two Blacks apart, then shame on them. That is part of the built-in systemic racism that is really very much part of our culture and is wrong, and we need to take it seriously. We need to take it seriously for two reasons, Rachel, in my book. Number one is ethically, okay? Wrong is wrong. To be prejudiced against people on the basis of their race is wrong and un-American. Secondly,
well, I think 99.99% of the population agrees with that. Where you get the discrepancy is some of these police officers aren't necessarily inherently racist. It's far more complex than that. And so that's my point. I think people need to understand when people are throwing around the phrase of systemic racism, what do they really mean? Do they really mean a bunch of white officers who don't like Black people? No, that's not what they mean. They're referring to something that's far more subtle, that's much more difficult to resolve.
But please don't minimize the fact that just because they don't like it. Look, back when I was back in the 60s, 70s, when I was a hippie, right?
Aren't you still a hippie?
I am. I'm an aging hippie, though. but I'm not saying that my hippiness has changed. It's probably just gotten worse. Okay, but there was a joke back then, or a trope back then, that everybody rolled their eyes at. And so I'm not a racist. Some of my best friends are black. Okay, and everybody goes like, man, here's a clueless white person who thinks that just because they have a couple of social friends who are black, that somehow exonerates them from prejudice. Okay, you've said something very important, Rachel, and I want to hold it up to the light for a minute, and that is, just because the cops don't hate black people, if they have primitive opinions, prejudices against black people, even though they don't dislike them, okay, that's racism. That is as racism as the KKK burning crosses. I'm sorry, you said it right. It's a subtler form, but because it's subtler, it's harder to fight and more insidious. And I want to put the Republican Party at the front line of fighting systemic racism and systemic sexism, because both of them are very real. Both of them are evil. We owe it ethically to ourselves to take a militant stand against both of those. And plus, there's not just on the ethical side, on the political side. Okay, the Texas Republican Party was all black until about the 1890s or early 20th century. The Republican Party was founded by Lincoln to fight slavery. The Whig Party went out of business. The Democrats were the pro-slavery party. The Whigs wanted to duck the issue, and you can't do that. And so the Whig Party went out of business, and Lincoln founded the Republican Party to fight slavery. Okay, there are votes in them that are hills. If we do the right thing, the ethical thing, for ethical reasons, not for utilitarian reasons, we can start bringing in, raising our share of the black vote from about 12% to about 20% to about 30%. Once we get to 50% of the black vote, like we're quickly getting on the Hispanic vote, because we are actually beginning to become more preferred by more Hispanics as more ethical and more sympathetic than the Democrats. The Hispanics, they're an honor culture. They hate being marginalized. They hate being patronized. And those chickens are coming home to roost in the Democratic Party, and they don't understand why, because they're blind to the fact that they're patronizing.
Okay. Well, here's where I think we're getting at the root of the problem finally. The reason I don't like the phrase systemic racism is because everybody knows that racism is bad, and racism is associated with not liking somebody because of the color of their skin. Well, when you have incidents like what happens to my boyfriend frequently, that's not racism. So can we at least change the phrase and say systemic discrepancies in equal treatment? Let's call it what it is. Let's not try to lump it in with the Ku Klux Klan. And the thing that really annoys me about it as well is when you've got people like me, who the left calls a white supremacist all the time on Twitter. I get called that because of my viewpoints. And I'm sorry, as long as I'm dating this man, and I know you don't like the thing, oh, I have a friend who's black. Well, I'm sick and tired of these people who these left-wing liberals will tell me, I'm not really attracted to black people, but you're the white supremacist. This is where it has gotten dysfunctional.
I am willing to lead a crusade, Rachel, to people who call you a white supremacist, to say, you have this babe all wrong. She's a feminist supremacist, not a white supremacist. So let's put them in their place, because you believe that women rule, and they should, and you are, part of the resurgent matriarchy, which scares me a little bit, because, what are the three matriarchal cultures in the world today? The ants, the bees, and the termites. I don't want us to be building American society on a matriarchal lines, because look what it did to the ants, right? You got a queen, a few drones, and everybody else is demoted to being little worker ants. And
Empire of the Ants was one of the best movies ever with Joan Collins. I highly recommend it.
Well, thank you. I will put it on my list of things to watch. So we're going to call you, in fact,
The queen bee.
it isn't too late, the feminist supremacist. It even almost rhymes. Feministsupremacist.com. Why don't you, or .org, why don't you just add that to your GoDaddy account, and you can become a conservative feminist supremacist. And when they call you white supremacist, you say, you're only half right. I'm a supremacist, but I'm a feminist supremacist. Deal with it. That will so confuse them that it will actually make them faint and STFU, and that's great, because then you can control the terms of the debate. And I love it when you do.
So I wanted to get into another aspect of this, and in my column at Townhall, I did mention this one incident where Joe Biden said that Black people are unable to get to parent-teacher conferences as much as white people. And a lot of Blacks were really offended because that's actually not true. You know, this is just one of the things that liberals say, that they like to make minorities look out to be victims, and it's not true. And, you know, the one thing that these lefties who live in their ivory towers and never actually associate with minorities don't understand is, if you are a minority in today's era, you are bombarded with messages that you are a victim, from when you wake up in the morning on social media, to the regular news all day long, to, if you're in education, you get these stories from your school, and then, you know, you come home in the evening, and if you happen to be around, a left winger who comes over to visit, they're like, hey, let's watch this interesting documentary on racism. And the thing is, they're tired of it. They're sick of it. You know, nobody wants to be reminded of slavery 24/7.
Well, you know, you're partially right, Rachel. Okay, this is a big reveal. I hope you're sitting down. Looks like you're sitting down. I hope it's not just CGI. Okay, I am a minority, a marginalized minority.
As a Jewish conservative,
I'm an old, white, heteronormative, cis male. Okay, and we're a dwindling faction. And you know what? I don't get any love from the liberals saying, "Oh, you are a marginalized minority, Ralph. You're part of what? How can we subsidize you?" So I'm okay if they want to be passing around, if they want to be passing around the handouts. Okay, as long as I get my fair share, but I'm not seeing it. Okay, nobody has said, you poor white male, old white male, heteronormative cis male, you know, we have to give you a reserved parking space, right? Like nursing mothers or whatever, whoever's getting reserved parking. We need to have a federal program for you to subsidize you, because it must be tough to be an old white heteronormative cis male in this day and age. And it is, Rachel, but do I get any sympathy? Heck no.
You know, times might be changing down the road, until finally, you know, people like you are ridiculed and put down and, you know, really discriminated against so badly. I mean, I just look at some of the pushback against, you know, women. I mean, women are finally starting to, you know, make a little bit of ground, you know, with feminism, and we're not, you know, being quite as treated as bad as we were. So, you know, nobody saw that turning around. So, right, it really could happen. But, you know, I hate to say it, Ralph, I don't see it happening anytime soon. It might not be in your lifetime. You're just gonna have to be continually labeled an old white supremacist.
I'm not. Nobody has ever labeled me a white supremacist. Maybe it's because I'm not.
It's coming.
You're
conservative and you're a white male. It's coming.
White heteronormative. I'm justly. I'm an old white heteronormative cis male. And you know what? We're a dwindling tribe. And I should think that at least they should carve out some reservations for us in the national parks, where we can all go run around, run around and hoot like indigenous. So, or at least a diorama portraying us in the Smithsonian Museum of American History. We played a big role in American history, and I think that, you know, there should be a monument to us, don't you?
You know, speaking of American history, and one thing that I think we can all celebrate, perhaps, but it might take a little coming around for some people from the South, you know, when they take down these Confederate monuments, we got to try to look at it a little bit positively in the sense that, you know, these Democrats have felt so guilty for their ancestors being slave owners for so many years that you kind of got to feel good that they're getting a sense of relief. They're feeling a lot better. They're feeling like they're absolving themselves of all their guilt of their ancestors owning slaves when they do this.
And it's a start. Okay, it's a start, but it doesn't go nearly far enough. Okay, number one, it's symbolic rather than substantive, and number two, it is in my view, it's way too narrow an exoneration. This goes back to Antonio Gramsci. This is part of cultural hegemony, and I welcome the fact that there's a coming to terms with this sin in our history, the sin of slavery, which was truly a vile sin, which I believe that we started the process of absolving ourselves from this with a civil war, in which the casualties and the casualties were intense, and we paid the price of eliminating slavery. Okay, that was just a start, because the systemic racism that was programmed in, the Jim Crow laws and so forth, lingered far too long, and I am appalled that the Republican Party is not being more militant about stamping out all of the remaining, which are serious remnants. Look, it's not just driving while black, DWB. Okay, black kids get busted for pot possession. Rand Paul gave a speech about this a few years ago, 10 times more often than white kids in terms of the population. Okay, and by the way, you don't want to call it racism. I'm persuadable about that. The Supreme Court has spoken about the fact that discrimination by itself is not a bad thing. It's good to be discriminating. What is prohibited by the Constitution and what is evil is invidious discrimination, and that is in landmark Supreme Court cases, that the Constitution prohibits invidious discrimination. So if you wanted to shift the discourse away from systemic racism into fighting invidious discrimination, it means educating our millions of viewers, because we've got a new concept bringing billions. We have a new concept bringing it to the fore. But I'm willing to start introducing the idea of fighting invidious discrimination.
I like that. Look at the legal definition. Okay.
That is the actual legal definition, and it's a brilliant one. Invidious means bigotry. It means something that is morally bankrupt. So discrimination based upon bigotry, invidious discrimination, is prohibited by the Constitution. Okay, our elected officials have taken an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. That means we need them to step up and fight invidious discrimination wherever they encounter it. And if they're not seeing it, then we need to you and I, conservative thought leaders, conservative members of the card-carrying members of the columnist party, okay, need to hold their feet to the fire and make them understand that it is a imperative, a moral and political imperative for them to be fighting, discovering, recognizing, and taking a militant stance against invidious discrimination, whether it's based upon color, whether it's based upon gender, whatever it's based, whenever it's not based in legitimate moral or characterological issues. It is invidious, and as George Washington once wrote, one of the things that America means at its core is to bigotry, no sanction.
And I want to bring out one more point. You know how I said that, you know, blacks don't like being reminded of slavery constantly 24/7. With us women, it's things like coat hangers. I don't want to hear about something, you know, way in the past. I don't even agree with a feminist on abortion. So quit talking about women giving themselves coat hanger abortions all the time. Everywhere I turn around, there's another protest with this going on. I want to hear about how women, now that we're actually allowed to do stuff, how we can actually become, tech entrepreneurs and CEOs and, make advances and top musicians and things like that. That's what I want to hear about. I want to hear about your one issue that you were hung up on in the past. And I think finally, people are going to come around and get it. But a lot of these Democrat male liberals out there, for sure, they don't understand. They don't get it that us women are sick and tired of being made out to be these pathetic victims. But anyways, we should probably wrap it up. And thanks to everybody for watching. And we will catch you next week.